In the God Delusion, I made a 7-point scale. 1 is I'm totally confident there is a God. 7 is I'm totally confident there is not a God. 6 is, to all intents and purposes, I'm an atheist. I live my life as though there is no God. But any scientist of any sense will not say that they positively can disprove the existence of anything. I cannot disprove the existence of the Easter Bunny, and so I'm agnostic about the Easter Bunny. It's in the same respect that I'm agnostic about God.
Okay, my last question. This is probably going to be the most simplest one for you to answer, but what if you're wrong?
Well, what if I'm wrong? I mean, anybody could be wrong. We could all be wrong about the flying spaghetti monster and the pink unicorn and the flying teapot. You happen to have been brought up, I would presume, in the Christian faith. You know what it's like not to believe in a particular faith because you're not a Muslim, you're not a Hindu. Why aren't you a Hindu? Because you happen to have been brought up in America, not in India. If you'd been brought up in India, you'd be a Hindu. If you were brought up in Denmark in the time of the Vikings, you'd be believing in Wotan and Thor. If you were brought up in classical Greece, you'd be believing in Zeus. If you were brought up in Central Africa, you'd be believing in the great Juju up the mountain. I mean, there's no particular reason to pick on the Judeo-Christian God in which, by the sheerest accident, you happen to have been brought up, and ask me the question, what if I'm wrong? What if you're wrong about the great Juju at the bottom of the sea?
True that Christianity has adopted many of the best values of humanity, but they don't belong to Christianity or indeed to any other religion. I think it would be very sad if it were true that you really did need religion in order to be good. Because if you think about it, what that would mean would be either that you get your morals and your values from the Bible or the Quran or some other holy book, or that you are good only because you're frightened of God, because you don't want to go to hell or you do want to go to heaven. Now, as for getting your morals from the Bible, I very sincerely hope nobody does get their morals from the Bible. It's true that you can find the occasional good verse, and the Sermon on the Mount would be one example, but it's lost amid the awful things that are dotted throughout the Old Testament, and actually throughout the New Testament as well, because the idea, the fundamental idea of New Testament Christianity, which is that Jesus is the Son of God who is redeeming humanity from original sin, the idea that we are born in sin, and the only way we can be redeemed from sin is through the death of Jesus. I mean, that's a horrible idea. It's a horrible idea that God, this paragon of wisdom and knowledge, power, couldn't think of a better way to forgive us our sins than to come down to earth in his alter ego as his son and have himself hideously tortured and executed so that he could forgive him.
I think that religion teaches people to stop questioning. I'm sure you disagree with that, but the way I see it, it is such a privilege to be born at all. It's a very improbable event that either of us were born. We have the privilege of being in this universe for a few decades. And during that time, it is an enormous privilege to be able to understand something about the universe in which we live, why we're here, why we were ever born, where we come from. And I think that is such a wonderful thing to be able to do that I am hostile, I can get angry about competing accounts which seem to me to not encourage that kind of questioning, but instead to say, this is how it is, it's all written in the Holy Book, it was written 2,000 years ago, and that's the end of it. I think that deprives people. I think that is such a belittling, a demeaning view of the universe, and I think it's tragic that children are brought up with that when they could be brought up in a more open-minded way. So that's one reason for the anger. The other reason we've touched upon, it is that I do think that faith, unsupported by evidence, is a lethal weapon. Not, doesn't have to be, of course it doesn't have to be, but it can be. It's a weapon because possibly unscrupulous people can get hold of often young men and use them as weapons, use them as human bombs. And the only reason they can be deployed as human bombs is that they have been brought up from childhood onwards to believe implicitly, without question, that whatever the particular religion is, the details don't matter. The point is that they do believe that it is the will of God that they should detonate themselves and blow up a busload of people or blow up a skyscraper in New York. I don't think that any kind of reasoned argument would do that to people.
Why we exist, you're playing with the word why there. Science is working on the problem of the antecedent factors that lead to our existence. Now, why in any further sense than that, why in the sense of purpose, is, in my opinion, not a meaningful question. You cannot ask a question like, why do mountains exist, as though mountains had some kind of purpose. What you can say is, what are the causal factors that lead to the existence of mountains? And the same with life, and the same with the universe. Now, science over the centuries has gradually pieced together answers to those questions. Why in that sense? It's true that there are still some gaps, but surely, Cardinal, you're not going to fall for the God of the gaps trap of saying that, that religion is going to fill in those gaps which science has so far not yet answered.
Yes, exactly.
But you've suddenly leapt from sophisticated discussions of the origin of the universe, where one can have a proper discussion about whether some sort of cosmic intelligence could have set forth the laws of physics, and you suddenly jump to a man who lived 2,000 years ago, was born of a virgin, rose again from the dead.
Well, I only did that because you mentioned it first at the beginning.
Well, I think that's petty. By comparison with the grandeur of the universe. I mean, to put my point again, do you really think that the creator of this magnificent edifice of the universe, the expanding universe, the galaxies, he really couldn't think of a better way to get rid of the sins on this one little speck of dust than to have himself tortured? He's the one who's doing the forgiving after all. Couldn't he just have forgiven?
Is it okay to tell a child that God doesn't exist?
Richard Dawkins.
I think it's okay to tell a child the truth. But I would prefer to encourage a child to make up her own mind and to think about the evidence and to believe things when there is evidence. What I think is not okay, what I think is deeply immoral, is to tell a child that when she dies, if she's not good, she's going to go to hell. That seems to me to be mental child abuse and an utter disgrace.
If you don't mind, can we spend a few minutes talking about God, if that's okay? So I'm just wondering, I too get asked at many lectures my view on God. And my typical answer is that, sure, there could be a God that's behind it all, and what we're doing as physicists, chemists, biologists, working out God's laws. And if that's how it is, I am thrilled to be part of that noble journey. I then add by saying, look, there's no evidence for that. I don't see any reason to believe that. And if what we're doing is just working out the laws of physics or chemistry or biology, and that's all that you need for a universe, I'm thrilled to be part of that journey. So the bottom line is, from a sociological, from a historical viewpoint, religion's very, very interesting, but it's kind of profoundly uninteresting to answer the deep questions, because I feel like all I'm doing is replacing one mysterious set of words framed scientifically with another set of equally mysterious words that are framed non-scientifically. Yeah. Now, I should say, after I say that, I always apologize, because I am all for hedging your bets. I'm not beyond that at all. What do you think of that view?
Well, I think that the sort of Newtonian, Newton thought that he was working out God's laws, and he was demonstrating the glory of God's mind when he worked out the laws of mechanics and so on. I'm not so at ease with that as you seem to be, because it does seem to me that if there is a supernatural, superhuman intelligence that worked it all out, in a way that undermines the entire scientific enterprise, because we are, maybe an evolutionary biologist feels this more strongly, The whole enterprise of evolutionary biology is to explain how you get prodigious complexity and design from virtually nothing. I mean, we hand over to physicists when we can go beyond the virtually nothing to the absolutely nothing. But if you start from quite an advanced level, bacteria, and work up to mammals and humans, we have a working theory which we know is true, which explains how you can go from great simplicity to prodigious complexity, and finally to the sort of complexity which is capable of designing things, of creating things, of working out how to do things. Well, if you are suddenly going to insert a designing machine, a creator, an intelligence at the root of the universe, you've just undermined your entire enterprise, because your entire enterprise has been to explain how you get to something complicated enough to do design. I think there's something wonderful about standing up and facing up to a universe where we are increasing our understanding, and we throw away childhood obsessions, we throw away the sort of imaginary friend that comforts us when we're children, and we feel the need for some kind of parent figure to turn to. I think when we grow up, we need to cast that aside and stand up tall in the universe. And it's cold, and we're not going to last for it. We're going to die, and we face up to that. And I think that's a nobler way of getting through life than to pin your hopes on childhood illusions. I don't think it's a very important question whether Jesus existed. There are some historians, most historians think he did, some
They
historians
certainly
don't.
do. I couldn't find an ancient historian that didn't.
Well, there are one or two, but I don't really care, actually, because precisely because it's petty. I mean, if you could possibly persuade me that there was some kind of creative force in the universe, there was some kind of physical, mathematical genius who created everything, the expanding universe, devised quantum theory, relativity, and all that. You could possibly persuade me of that. But that is radically and fundamentally incompatible with the sort of God who cares about sin, the sort of God who cares about what you do with your genitals, the sort of God who is interested, who has the slightest interest in your private thoughts and wickednesses and things like that. Surely you can see that a God who's grand enough to make the universe is not going to give a tuppenny cuss about what you're thinking about and your sins and things like that.
So you think that morality is not important?
Of course I don't think morality is not important. I'm a human being.
Sounds like you're saying it isn't important.
I'm a human being, and I live in a society of human beings, and within a society of human beings, morality is of course important. But we are one of billions of planets on a huge scale, and a cosmic God who bothers about this kind of human scale is not the kind of God that is compatible with a scientific view of the universe. It's a medieval view. I, as an atheist, my friends as atheists, lead thoroughly worthwhile lives, in our opinion, because we stand up, look the world in the face up to the fact that we are not going to last forever. We have to make the most of the short time that we have on this planet. We have to make this planet as good as we possibly can and try to leave it a better place than we found it.
Now, to some degree, you've already answered this, but there is a follow-up question. I'm going to go to that now. It's from Rebecca Ray.
Okay, my question for you today is, without religion, where is the basis of our values? And in time, will we perhaps revert back to Darwin's idea of survival of the fittest?
Richard Dawkins, you can answer that, and I'll bring in Cardinal Pell.
I very much hope that we don't revert to the idea of survival of the fittest in planning our politics and our values and our way of life. I've often said that I'm a passionate Darwinian when it comes to explaining why we exist. It's undoubtedly the reason why we're here and why all living things are here. But to live our lives in a Darwinian way, to make a society a Darwinian society, that would be a very unpleasant sort of society in which to live. It would be a sort of Thatcherite society. And we want to, I mean, in a way, I feel that one of the reasons for learning about Darwinian evolution is as an object lesson in how not to set up our values and our social lives.
The Blind Watchmaker. Oh, that's my favorite book of yours, if I may.
Okay. Well, The Watchmaker comes from William Paley, the theologian, who said that there must be a God because if you find a watch, you pick up the watch. He was crossing a heath, he said. You open it up. There's a great big pocket watch in those days.
Back when watches were watches.
Yes, that's right. And you see all the cogwheels and springs and things. It had to have a designer, of course it did. And so how much more would you say that of an eye or a knee joint or anything living? So that's the Paley watchmaker argument. Natural selection is the blind watchmaker. It produces results that are like watches. They're beautifully designed. Eyes are beautifully designed, certain flaws, but they are beautifully designed. And they come about not through any design process, not through any deliberate design, but through the blind watchmaker, which is natural selection. So
that's hard for people to accept, especially if they're deeply religious.
Yes.
Because they already have an account.
Yes.
Now you're saying one of the acts of their God is some random force operating.
He didn't have to be there at all.
He didn't have to be there at all.
Yes.
And I think where people get confused, and even some of our people have made this mistake, Fred Hoyle, who was the architect of the steady state universe, who pejoratively invented the name Big Bang to describe the universe beginning in one point. He said that in a pejorative way. He wanted the universe to be a steady state. He did a calculation for how you would get an eye, a fully functioning eye, and how long that would take. And it was some impossibly, 10 to the some very high power number of years, given the rate at which you have defects in a genome. And correct me if I'm wrong, the rebuttal to that is natural selection is not completely random.
Well, no, that's right. It actually wasn't an eye. It was a hemoglobin molecule, but it's the same argument anyway. So what he overlooked was that it doesn't happen all in one go. He imagined all the bits coming together at random.
And that's one case that doesn't work, and it has another random thing that doesn't work.
Yes.
And you do that forever.
You do that forever. Of course you want, but what you need is, let's use the eye, even though he didn't. You need a slightly less good eye, and then a slightly less good eye, and a slightly less good eye. And if you start with just a sheet of light-sensitive cells, which just detect whether it's light or dark, that's useful. It's not like
it's better than not having it.
It's better than not having it. You can tell when it's night or day. You can tell whether there's a predator flying overhead. And then if you have a slightly cup-shaped, if you bend that retina from a flat thing into a slight cup, then if it's coming from that direction, it hits that side of the. We are on video, aren't we? Yes. And so you get, it's not an image, but it gives a slight directionality. And then you close up and you start to get a pinhole camera. It's a very crude, it's out of focus, but it's sort of an image. And then you need a little bit of transparent gunk in there. It's not a proper lens, but it does something like a lens. And all these stages, one by one, they step by step, they incrementally improve.
And every improvement is the new starting place for the variations at that generation.
That's right, and then you get improvement.
Because every generation is not starting from zero.
That's right, yes.
So The Blind Watchmaker, I just thought that was brilliantly written, and it was my benchmark for if I were to ever write a book for the public, I want to be this articulate.
Oh, wow, that's high praise, Neil.
I just want you to know. I just want you to know that.
Thank you for that.
Okay.
Here we have this phenomenally sophisticated information processor, which is the cell. Am I really to believe that that information processing capacity simply came about by the laws of nature and random processes without a mind?
Yes.
Well, absolutely. I find that impossible to believe as a mathematician.
I know you do. This is called the argument from personal incredulity.
I've become cynical is not the right word. I become a practical cynic. There are people who think this way or feel that way or behave this other way. And I've stopped trying to change them. What I try to do is offer a way of looking at the world that maybe they'll take, maybe they won't. Maybe as an educator, it's my job to make this as tasty as possible. So that, hey, that's a good idea. I never thought about it that way. But otherwise, I just gave a presentation to a Christian school, K through 12. I talked about optics. And at the end, there was open Q&A, and they were 11th graders. And they started grilling me on science versus the Bible. And I said, I'm not here to stop you from being religious at all. Okay, we live in a country that protects your freedom to be religious, and you're in a private school. So the government is not going to come after you and say you have to get this out of the public coffers. I made that clear, but I didn't have the urge to try to convert them. And I get the sense that you've had this urge your entire life to convert people with no less zeal than a religious person, a religious evangelical religious person would have trying to convert people who are not that. Did I tell you? I didn't tell you this. We have a Big Bang Theater here.
Yes.
And back when we first opened here at the Hayden Planetarium, there's a separate theater space where we just talk about the Big Bang. Someone came out of the Big Bang, saw me and says, how come you didn't mention God in there? And then I realized, okay, what am I going to do? I say, how about this? Why don't you go to our Hall of Human Evolution and then come back here? And when I tell them to do that, they never come back because that's way more offensive to them, having monkeys and humans hold hands in the dioramas than anything we could ever say in the Big Bang here.
I thought they'd rather like the Big Bang. I mean, the Big Bang sounds pretty much like Genesis.
It's a creation event. Yeah. Yes. Maybe that's why they thought we should have mentioned God and didn't. But I don't even have the conversation. I just send them over to your part of the museum.
Yes. But I think you're being too pusillanimous. You shouldn't duck the question.
Well, I don't duck it so much as sometimes I don't have the energy.
Oh, that's different. I get that too.
You feel that?
I understand that. But in my field, that really is an absolute opposition. It's not something you
complete. Although the Catholic Church, they've met you in the middle.
Yeah, they have.
They said, we have this branch of primates, and then God breathed the soul into them, and they're humans, allowing evolution all up to that point.
Yeah.
You got to give them something. You got to
not a step.
But the world is not that binary. It's not that binary. I don't see it that way. There are religious people who are where Jesus is their savior, but they're perfectly fine with a 4.5 billion year old Earth.
Yes, they are.
Okay, they're not at the extreme.
They don't see the contradiction, but yes.
So maybe the plurality of the world is a feature rather than a bug of the programming of what it is to be human.
But the truth is so much more grand and so much more elegant and so much more poetic and so much more beautiful. Why drag Jesus in?
And I would still claim you could get more of that across if people didn't feel talking to you.
Yeah, that's...
Now, in the case of the cosmos, freak accident or design, the point that I've made over and over again is that even if we don't understand how it came about, it's not helpful to postulate a creator, because the creator is the very kind of thing that needs an explanation. And although it's difficult enough to explain how a very simple origin of the universe came into being, how matter and energy, how one or two physical constants came into existence, although it's difficult enough to think how simplicity came into existence, it's a hell of a lot harder to think how something as complicated as a god comes into existence, difficult enough to think of how a deist God comes into existence, and even more difficult to think of how a Christian God who actually cares about things like sin and gets himself born of a virgin.
So did I tell you this? Do you remember there was this, it was on YouTube, it was what's called Double Rainbow Guy. Have you ever seen this?
No.
Double Rainbow. You should check it out.
Okay.
Okay, this is now back when social media was just people posting things. It wasn't the cesspool that it is today.
Yes.
So he was hiking somewhere. There's some guy back when you needed a camcorder to take videos,
Yes.
not a cell phone. He's hiking in, was Sierra Madres, I don't remember where. And you hear him sort of narrating his, oh, that's a nice cliff. Then he turns a corner and he says, oh, a rainbow. Oh my gosh, what could it mean? Oh, a double rainbow. Oh my gosh. And he's tearing. You don't see him, but you can easily interpret just his emotions and his breath. And then he goes prostrate to the ground.
Yes.
And he can't contain himself. What does it mean? This is a sign. And so I felt bad doing this. You might be proud of me, but I felt bad doing this. I tweeted, I put a link to this video, and I said, this is how you behave if you've never studied physics.
Yes.
But I thought that was kind of mean. He's having his moment.
Well, in a way, that's what Keats was doing. And that's
To
what
Newton.
Yes, that's right. But anyway, I can cap your story in the opposite direction. I read a story about a woman in California. She had a lawn sprinkler, and she saw a rainbow in the lawn sprinkler, and she said, what are they doing to our water supply?
That's funny. Oh my gosh.
If you guys love Richard Dawkins thus far, I'm not sure you feel the same way still by the end of this video after what I'm about to point out. It's basically two separate comments that Richard Dawkins recently made, but the second one is the one that caused some fracas online. And I disagree with Dawkins as well, it's clear to point that out. Anyway, here it goes. Despite being the world's leading or easily recognizable atheist in the world, Richard Dawkins would, this year in 2024, refer to himself as a cultural Christian during an interview by Rachel Johnson from March this year. At first, like you, I was a bit confused by that, but then he'd go on to explain. I'm not a believer, but there is a distinction between being a believing Christian and a cultural Christian. I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. And I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but that actually does make a lot of sense to me, as it's something that I struggled with for a while before I came to the realization that it's okay to still feel comfort in certain Christian traditions. For instance, it's a habit in my culture not to be too certain about the future, and so in conversations we'll basically use the Swahili equivalent of if God's will it. So for instance, if I tell you something like, hey, I plan on visiting the zoo tomorrow, I'll also instinctively follow it up with Majaliwa. You know, that's my plan, but you'll know anything cool happened between now and then. So when I started shedding religiosity from my life once I couldn't help but notice the glaring hypocrisies in all things religion, I actually had a hard time with that. I'd feel almost guilty subconsciously for railing against organized religion, but later on still use if God wills it during a conversation. It basically made me feel like a con man, and that's just a single example. Anyway, I did at some point recognize that my relationship with these Christian tendencies went way beyond spirituality. They were embedded in the culture I was raised up in, so there shouldn't be any conflict within myself if I use them in daily conversations. And even more importantly, I'm not an atheist really. I'm what you describe as agnostic at most. I just have a serious issue with organized religion and their tendency to not only position themselves as the only right way, but also their consistent desire to embed themselves in scientific, political, educational institutions, all those where people of different religions come together to interact. So yeah, man, all that to say, I agree with Richard Dawkins on this. I do feel a weird sense of comfort in Christian spaces. Where I vehemently disagree with him, however, is how within the same interview he went on to somehow whitewash the effects of Christianity in the world in an effort to rail against Islam, as he usually does. According to him, he was greatly disturbed by the growing visibility of Islam in the West. To be specific, he was, and I quote, slightly horrified to see that the Oxford Street in London had promoted Ramadan, the month for fasting in the Islam religion, instead of Easter. He'd go on to say, if I had to choose between Christianity and Islam, I'd choose Christianity every single time. Because, again, and I quote, the former is a fundamentally decent religion in a way that I think Islam isn't. Christianity is a fundamentally decent religion in a way that he thinks Islam isn't. to be fair to him, I tried dissecting what he really meant by that sentence. Does he mean that Christianity is inherently, like at its foundation, better than its counterpart? Or does it just mean that at this point in history, Christian societies tend to be more accepting and civil? If he means the former, then that couldn't be further from the truth. You cannot name a single thing that has been done in the name of Islam that hasn't been done in the name of Christianity at some point in history. And I mean in terms of scale as well. Both religions are more or less equal in terms of the amount of devastation they've caused across the world. And actually, you know what? I actually assure you guys that every single major atrocity committed by societies in European or majorly Christian countries over the last 2,000 plus years has either been directly justified using or caused by religion. Name one if you do not agree. So on that front, I hope you and I can agree on that. Now, let's get to the second scenario. The scenario that at this point in history, Christian countries and societies appear to have together way more compared to their Middle Eastern counterparts. Now, if I am to be honest, give me an option between moving to a Christian or Muslim country and I'd more than likely pick a Christian one. I don't even think Dubai would be an option for me. But man, not in a million years will you hear me say that Christianity is a fundamentally decent religion in a way that its counterpart isn't. Have you guys listened to what Christian right-wingers, conservatives, are advocating for or things they wish they would reintroduce into society in the name of religion? And you can say they are just a loud minority, but I could say the same exact things or crimes committed or disturbing policies recommended in the name of Islam. In America, for example, you just had the Supreme Court that's packed with religious conservatives, by the way, overturn a landmark decision that protected the reproductive rights of women. And as I said in the previous video, it has nothing to do with the desire to save lives, man. Because try banning things they love in the name of saving actual lives and you'll see just how mad they get. So you guys get what I'm saying? You could make the case that atrocities committed in the name of one in this day and age are worse than those committed in the name of the other. And I think I'd agree with that. But that isn't because one is fundamentally better than the other. Christian societies, generally speaking, tend to be better in spite of things advocated in the Bible. Because as history has taught us the hard way, give religious leaders the reins of the country. And all I can say is, I hope you'll live long enough to regret it. And it doesn't matter what religion it is, man. And I'd like you guys to also notice that nowhere in my response did I include the factor of Western countries repeatedly interfering in the Middle East. Unless we're going to pretend that engineering hardships within any society doesn't screw up the moral sensibilities of said society. Yeah, man. Also, when Richard Dawkins said that naturally it caused havoc across the internet with multiple prominent Muslim voices slamming Dawkins as expected, one of the most prominent was the well-known journalist Mehdi Hassan, who criticized Dawkins' remarks saying, turns out the anti-religion dude isn't actually anti-religion, he's just anti-Muslim. And I personally do not fault him for coming to that conclusion after everything I've talked about above. Now, needless to say, I'd really love to hear what all of you guys have to say about all this and what your reaction to Dawkins' comment was. Do you agree with him or not? And do you think my opinion on the matter is way off, or am I on the right track? Other than that, thanks a lot for sticking with me to the end, man, and I hope you've loved listening to this smart individual. I still respect him. And by the way, easily one of his most famous books is titled Delusion. And I'll be honest, I haven't taken a look at it personally, but I intend to. And I hope you'll check it out as well, because I hear it's totally worth it. So yeah, that's it for today, man. Stay safe, and I'll see you again in the next one. Peace.